art projects right now. So if you want to go and see the actual objects and see more photographs of thinkers, it's there. And that's me. So.
All right. Today I just want to talk really briefly about some contextual issues around exchange. There we go. And to actually propose a definition to begin with and work with in our discussion on what I've agreed upon with your own experiences. Let's think of exchange as a flow of people, capital, technology, information, or ideology. This may be familiar to some of you. This is actually a redefinition of a popularized definition of ethnoscapes, and it's an article on the structure and differences in the global cultural economy in the late 1990s, where he really wanted to emphasize what's happening now with the flow of all of these different things. That the flows have always been part of our global experience, but have rapidly intensified, and both in speed, and content, and range. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects of the project, is how each of the artists are dealing with intensification and exchange, and how that intensification reveals histories that we may or may not know, or that we bring to our experience of seeing the actual objects. I really encourage you to go to the exhibition galleries and look at the pieces. Last night was a phenomenal experience. The pieces work so well together, revealing the process of production of art, the weaving, craft. I really like that piece. Certification of performance, and the discovery of objects from an idea. When the artist had brought over an idea, he wanted to make something here, and found some organic material and made his object. Where another artist brought something we're all familiar with about a Bion box, but she covered it in sparkling glitter. But leaving it not completely protected, so that when it arrived, you saw the evidence of movement, transport. And she explained to me as a site-specific piece, and she showed an image of the two boxes in front of her, I guess her studio in the Bay Area, and juxtaposed it with the two actual boxes there in the studio, or in the gallery. And I actually thought, well, this actually isn't really site-specific as much as it is a transit-specific piece for me. Evidence of movement, for me, I think is really important, because in my work, I really look at the production of social space in different ways. It's interesting because we talk about exchange, flow here, things from one place to another. In this project that I'm just entering into in historic Philippine town in Los Angeles, it's called Why We Gather. And it's a project bringing together stories of why people gather. So it's almost a counterpoint of, rather than exchange and movement, it's actually a project of finding out how do we coalesce, how do we come together in nodes, why do we come together in these moments to share our stories. And I think it's really powerful. That one's still in process, as is this one, and it's going to be interesting to see how they mix as many of the folks work together in Los Angeles, here, Mexico, and all over the world. Thank you.
Right, so it's time to break the fourth wall. So if you have any questions or comments, Arnie?
I have two. Hi, my name's Arnie. I have two questions, and they might sound a little odd. document I'm going to start out to preach. But number one, on a lofty level, can art serve as the moral stick with which we, the globalization babies, beat ourselves out of our stupor, out of our state of indifference? Can art be the ultimate shocker for us when we say we're the most jaded people, compared to the other generations?
We can start with, we hope so.
Maybe to dive into that question a little bit more, maybe I'd be curious to know, like, just to clarify that question, in terms of like an example or like what, so that we can kind of jump into it.
I was watching a documentary on BBC. I don't watch CNN. And the commentator said something about the overarching theme of our generation, the post-9/11, post-modernist, and post-Prozac generation, is economics and how it basically dictates our lives. The flow of money, the flow of capital, the commodification not only of objects, but of other people and their services. This determines our lives. And then he asked, can art still save us from the stupor of payment and receipts?
Well, wow, we're gonna get back to said no. I say yes with a caveat, with a little kind of appendage on it, which is that in my experience, I think as artists, all of us have had different experiences showing with commercial galleries, large institutions, and kind of a lot like money situations, and then that we have these kind of hit and run, do-it-yourself, almost like punk rock, unfunded, under-the-radar projects, and they're two very different things. And so when I say yes to that question, I say yes, art can, but when it actually, to a certain extent, stays under the radar or tries to stay under the radar of the capitalist structure. And I'm sure you're wondering if that's possible. I think with nonprofit spaces like Green Papaya, I mean that's probably one good example. But I don't know. I'm speaking for two.
I would answer that. I think that because I've done a lot of work in public space and realm where I'm dealing with a lot of different communities and institutions and politics and bureaucracy, which is really different than working in the commercial side of the art world. I think that it's possible, but I think that you have to accept that it takes a lifetime. I think that you have to accept that it takes incredible persistence, and you have to accept that it takes a dedication, and you have to accept that it takes a development of a practice. And that, you're going to be working, we all have to make a living. We all have to make money to live. So you can't sort of, have kind of like an ivory tower ideal of like, I'm just going to be this, you have to combine all of these ways. We have to be smart. We have to work in a really complex society. But I think that if you, like Stephanie said, you do work in the commercial world, you do work under the radar, and you have to continue to do that kind of work. Because if you don't, you'll lose sight, and you will be swallowed up by the really huge forces that we all face in the world today. So you just really have to stick with it, I think.
There's a lot of work to be made here. Like one of the examples were not commodity based, or if they were about commodities, you couldn't sell it.
Like the counterfeit crochet bags are not for sale. They belong to the people. Johanna's murals are not for sale. And so I think there's a huge vein right now of artists trying to work in ways around the commodity issue that you brought up.
I know what you mean. It's also part of
Yeah, she's another person.
I mean, maybe just thinking about the introduction speech, maybe I fall on the idealist and activist side, but I think a lot of us, and it's just a fact, we make art for reasons that will never be quantified. Language, emotion, feelings.
Are there any questions?
Is everybody familiar with the